I'm going to explain how best to optimize your hardware to work with Premiere Pro. And the first step to take when doing that is to look at the requirements on the Adobe website. So this is the adobe.com products Premiere tech specs HTML page if you want to go back there. If you look at this, you have system requirements for Windows and for Mac. And the requirements are basically the same for both platforms. You need at least a dual-core processor, be it Intel or AMD. And for Mac, it's a multi-core, but the same thing, at least 2 cores. You need to have a 64-bit operating system. There's Windows 7 64-bit or Mac OS, which is 64-bit. At minimum of 4 gigabytes of RAM, and a few other odds and ends here in terms of the speed of the hard drive, OpenGL, which is pretty standard these days, the size of your display, and then an optional Adobe certified GPU. I'm going to drill down and explain a few of these points. The 5 most important things you need to consider when you optimize your hardware: the operating system, the central processing unit, the memory, the hard drive speed, and the graphics processing unit. You have to have a 64-bit OS, and you probably already know that because if you're running Premiere Pro, by gosh, it's on a 64-bit OS. But why is that? Well, a 32-bit operating system can address only 4 gigabytes of RAM. 64-bit can address a lot more, and that means you can see more color, you can have more HD formats supported, and you can have more software running in the background. It's just a higher performance system, and that's good for Premiere Pro because it's a high performance product. As far as your CPU, you need at least 2 cores, but 2 cores is just scratching the surface. The more cores, the merrier. Premiere Pro is one of the few pieces of software that's been written specifically to split up instructions into whatever number of cores your system has. And this comes into play in particular when you're watching video. If you're working with HD footage that needs to be uncompressed, typically highly compressed HD footage like AVC HD, for example, needs to be really processed hard to get it uncompressed for playback. And the CPU does most of that heavy lifting. So the more cores you have, the smoother that playback will be. In terms of RAM, the minimum is 4 gigabytes, but really the more RAM, the merrier. And 12 gigabytes is kind of the starting point, and 16 gigabytes is more or less the sweet spot. And the more RAM you have, the more things you can have running in the background. And if you work with production premium products from Adobe, you might have After Effects or Encore or the Adobe Media Encoder or Photoshop running in the background. That's not at all unusual for a video production workflow. And so the more RAM, the merrier. The hard drive is probably going to be your worst bottleneck. Most hard drives these days run at 7,200 RPMs, and the throughput is more or less the same from one hard drive to the next. And if you work with relatively uncompressed HD footage, that will not be fast enough. Those are big files with big throughput in terms of megabytes per second, and a typical 7,200 RPM hard drive can't handle that throughput. So what you need to do is find some way to accelerate that. Well, there are 10,000 RPM drives, but they probably won't be good enough either. Instead, what you need to do is use what's called a RAID array, a RAID 0 array specifically. RAID stands for Redundant Array of Independent or Inexpensive Disks, depending on who you're talking to. And RAID 0 in particular takes data and splits it up into whatever number of disks you've got in the RAID array. So I have a RAID 0 array on my machine here with just 2 drives, 2 7,200 RPM drives, and it can handle HD footage without any problem at all. So a couple of drives of the RAID 0 controller is really the way to go in terms of avoiding bottlenecks. Finally, an Adobe certified graphics processing unit will accelerate your effects. It'll make effects play back smoothly off the timeline. Let me just show you what I mean by all of this. Here in Premiere, I've got 5 clips, this base clip, these clouds, and 4 clips running on top of that. And you see this little yellow line here. That means it'll play back smoothly with no need to create a preview file. That's because I have a graphics processing unit here on my machine, and it's going to handle the effects that were applied to these 4 clips. Now, the effect here in this case is that they were made smaller, but that is an effect, and the GPU will pick up on that and will play these guys back smoothly, even at full resolution here. Let me play this back for you. Now, depending on how you're viewing this, you might not see it as smooth. It might look a little stuttered because of just the way that the tutorial videos are made, but it's playing back smoothly on my system. And if I turn off my graphics processing unit by going to Project Settings, General, and turn off my Mercury Playback Engine GPU acceleration, to say software only instead of using the hardware, I'm going to get a message here about turning off the previews, which I don't have here because I don't need any previews, but I'll turn them off anyways. Now I get a little red line saying, okay, you got a lot of stuff piled up here, and it's not going to play back smoothly. At least that's what Premiere thinks. You notice a little yellow tip there, right there, because There's just one little spot where just that bottom clip is playing without the guys on top that have effects on them. So that little yellow spot would play back smoothly, but the rest, it would be best to make a preview file to see it play back smoothly if that's what I want to see. But I'll just play back now. We'll see what happens here. It goes for a couple seconds, and then it starts stuttering. That's a little bit of a problem there, because it really can't play it back on the fly without the help of that graphics processing unit. Now, if you don't have a graphics processing unit, you can then knock down the resolution of the screen here from full to something other than full. I'll knock it down to 1/4 here. And then that will probably play back more smoothly. You'll notice that it still looks sharp here in pause. That's one of the features. It does display sharply in pause, but when I play it, it just gets a little lower resolution. Not too bad, just a little on the fuzzy side. But it does play back smoothly, even though I don't have the GPU turned on right now. Let me go back and switch it on. I'll show you one more little thing here. Go back and make it hardware again. I'll get that message about previews being deleted. Now we're back. We got the yellow line back again, and it'll play back smoothly at 1/4, of course. I'll switch it back to full, though. And I'm going to apply an effect on top of all of these clips. There's a new feature in Premiere Pro CS6 called an adjustment layer. It came from After Effects. We'll add an adjustment layer here. Now I'll just add that on top of all these guys here. I'll stretch it out a bit. It's essentially a transparent layer on which you can apply effects. So I'm going to apply an effect to this guy that affects all 5 clips down below it. We'll apply the fast color corrector here. There we go. To that. And that's an accelerated effect. And you can tell it's accelerated because we got this little guy there that says that's an accelerated effect. I'll go to my effect controls and I'll make a couple of adjustments here. Make it a little bit warmer. Add a little higher contrast. So you can see that we're actually applying the effect to all 5 clips at once. And now I've applied this effect and I still have a yellow bar. That means that the GPU can still handle the fact that I've applied an effect that touches all 5 clips at once. And the playback right here in my machine is going quite smoothly, thank you. And that's because the GPU is handling all the heavy lifting. Now it's important to know that you need to use an Adobe certified GPU to get that extra acceleration. And to see a list of those GPUs, go back to the site we looked at before when we talked about system requirements. It's the adobe.com products Premiere TechSpecs.html site. And go past the system requirements down here a little bit farther to the supported NVIDIA graphics cards for GPU acceleration. And there's the list that was active at the time I did this course. Now this list is dynamic, so it may be updated by the time you view this course. But in any event, if you want to buy a GPU, come back to the site and make sure you get one of these certified GPUs. So following these recommendations will lead to smoother performance as you do your video production in Premiere Pro.